Eh, Teman-teman, sore ini kami kedatangan seorang tamu, Steven Yin, diaspora Malaysia. Selamat malam, Steven, apa kabar?
Selamat malam, apa khabar Bapak Anton?
Okay,
Dan a very happy Father's Day too.
yes, you too. Thank you.
Thank
Well, the first question is why Australia? There are four other continents.
you. Okay. Firstly, Bapak Anton, I want to thank you for inviting me to be on your podcasting interview. It is a privilege to share the objective of sharing our migrant story in Australia.
Mhm.
Um, I received my early education tertiary in the United Kingdom, and that was many decades away. And there was a transitional part where, from being a Malaysian native, I had a very huge exposure to the Western world because I left for further education from Malaysia at the age of about 18.
Mhm.
And then after having graduated, I went back to Malaysia, but I had the privilege to work in a big multinational company that took me to be responsible in leadership in many different pockets of the country around Southeast Asia.
Mhm. Mhm.
And gradually, when my relative and a lot of my clan who were educated in Australia decided that they would not be going back to Malaysia, they took the choice to settle down in Melbourne. My family and my wife, we were invited to look into taking an option of moving to a new homeland to rebuild our life. And that was why we had the encouragement or push factor to pick Australia because majority of both my wife and my clan are all residents of Australia. That was the main factor. Mhm.
I think you chose the right continent. Is this still in a lucky country?
Um, I think it's a blessed country because from moving over here, I got connected to many diaspora all over the world, including the Indonesian one and even your good self, where a lot of friendship has been enhanced throughout the years of being uh, friends. Yeah.
Mhm. What's behind this? I've seen you, in many, cultural events. What
Mhm.
motivates you really? I mean, this is you miss the homeland or the personality? What could you tell me more about it, please?
I have a very blessed background because I come from a very multi-ethnic and multicultural country, which is Malaysia. And I think you know the tagline is Malaysia, truly Asia. And therefore, I had an upbringing where my neighbors from my left and from my left could be Hindus, could be Muslims. And because my parents were servants of the government, we had a very rich diversity of friends.
Mhm.
And I grew up in a very multicultural, what you call neighborhood.
Mhm.
Okay. And therefore, when I had the privilege to move to Australia with my family, it was the continuation passion when you see so many other foreigners from all around the world in your neighborhood. You just want to play a role, to take that little bit of rich experience you have and share it out in the Australian environment uh, to keep to keep the community engaged.
Mhm.
And that's why I think we have earned the most multicultural country in the world, Australia.
Mhm.
And it's due to people like all of us who are able to move out from our safety net of our home every weekend to take part and to celebrate each other's diversity, to sit on volunteer boards of many multicultural platform and to continue to bring our arts, our culture, our music, our food to be shared with everyone from a different ethnic background in Australia.
we met, I mean, a few years ago. I mean, my observation, I mean, I see Stephen Yin is someone who very adaptable. And also people say if you move to another country, would take a year at least, to feel at home. Could you tell us, your diaspora, experience the first year, and please?
I still remember more than 7 years ago when I was presented to make the acquaintance with you, Papa and Don,
Uh-huh,
and we were doing a poem reading on the stage for one of the Purvira event.
uh-huh,
Now, when you mention how is it that I enjoyed engaging with other people in my daily life, is because I think God has made each one of us a very special individual. I am blessed that I am humbled that I I had that love to engage in the terms of people to people engagement. It's probably a DNA, maybe from my father or from my mother's side or from my grandparents, but it is a very beneficial part of me because I enjoy engaging with other people, learning about their culture, learning about their happiness, learning about their challenges, because each one of us share the same kind that we can relate to in our daily life in Melbourne.
mhm. And also, after many, many years, I could see you really start to get involved deeper into poetry. So how the process it began until today.
I think when a person who do not like me have much appreciation of poetry, but is guided and inspired by people who are who is a gentleman, a poet, a writer, like how I first encountered from you. I think you gave me a different inspiration to look into why do people indulge in poetry reading, read poetry, create poetry, because it actually breaks out the barrier of engagement. So 7 years ago, when I first got to know you, I was a child with no knowledge of poem or poetry. My my first impression is probably William Shakespeare or some of my famous Malaysian playwrights like Dinsman, Usman Awang. Um, but because you were always in the forefront, I've also looked into the public profile of what you do with your Indonesian diaspora. You're a captain of your poetry society, and tonight I'm pleased to tell you that I discover that there's also a new generation of Malaysian poetry writers like Jack Lim, Kwan Antan, which writes poetry away from the Malay language, but in English, but the expression of the environment is based on the Malaysian homeland which they grew up from.
Mhm. Now, how do you see the difference between the two? I mean, the Malaysian poetry, Indonesian poetry, are they much different?
From my very brief understanding, which I'm still researching, is that I think the expression of poetry from the Indonesian perspective has a bit of dynamism in terms of nationality, patriotism. Um, it's a struggle for their own identity. I think it's a break away from the colonial uh, setup which they come from. Whereas the Malaysian one tends to be more romantic.
Mm.
It talks more of folklore. And maybe because the transition of our independence from the British was in a much peaceful way compared to the Indonesian
Mhm.
way of finding the independence. So, but each of them, from each country perspective, has a rich characteristic of expression.
Very interesting observation, Stephen. between the two, the Indonesian language comes from the Malay, originally from Malay language, and
Yep.
developed to the different, in the entity. But the poetry, Malay poetry on your, description is more romantic, yeah?
Yep.
Right, okay. Very interesting. Now, there's a saying, Stephen, humans make plans, God makes decision. Now, how much this saying apply in your journey in this life?
That is a profoundly very powerful question posed to me. Um, I think for me to answer you that question is that first of all, I need to check with myself. Do I have a belief system? I do. So if I have a belief system in somebody who's higher than me, or God, the creator, then I'm able to confirm with you that whatever man can plan or whatever I can plan, but if it's not ordained by God, it would not turn out to be that way. Just like I was never intended uh, to make Australia my choice of my next generation leaving, but from the way it was translated for me and my family, I felt that yes, God has a part in putting each of us individually in different spaces of the global world for its own purposes.
Mm. How much is it being diverted from the original plan? Is this were not 45 degrees or 90 or
I think 360 degrees. I am a reluctant migrant.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm a reluctant migrant. Yeah. I had a very what do you call bountiful and fruitful and happy life career in Malaysia after I graduated from England. And I had that privilege to be um, a corporate man based in India, Philippines, Singapore, Brunei. I was practically everywhere, and I did not need to dig up my roots and bring my family to Australia. So I am a reluctant migrant, but I have no regret. As I said before, man can plan, but God will ordain it. Yeah,
Yes. Now you mentioned you graduated from England University,
yes,
British
yeah,
University. How many years
yeah.
did you live in England?
I had my life 10 years in the United Kingdom.
Right.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. I was sent away very early by my father and mother. It was a traditional thing for family members and my clan in Malaysia to put the children to either Ireland or England. Yeah. So I'm one of the generation that was put to England. Yeah.
Right. This is it's getting more interesting, Stephen.
Hmm.
As
Yep.
you know, I mean, Australia is comes from British stock, yeah.
Correct.
How much do you think Australia really form identity as a Australia compared to British England? How much do you see the away from the British
Mhm.
heritage?
I think we would be very naive to say that Australia is a replica of the English or England. Um, just like it will be very naive to say that
Yeah.
America, New Zealand are also part of the British Empire, but do they look any bit like England today? No. I think they Australia inherited the way of government, but the operational level of it and the ground level for the citizens are totally different. So I would say that there is a huge difference between the English expectation and coming to Australia thinking that it's a very easy transition because I have been raised in, I had my education in England, therefore coming to Australia would be just like a walk in the park. It's not, it looks like England. It came from England. It's not England, it's Australia, and it has its own identity.
Would you agree if I, make a statement? Australia is the most, tolerant people.
I think we are working very hard towards achieving an utopia or perfection where we are totally very multiracial. I think the reason why is Australia is probably the only Western country surrounded by a pool of Asian country. And therefore, Australia's experience would be um, evolving from the richness of its neighbor. And because the main partners around Australia is actually Asian, and therefore many of us we are able to come into Australia with our own way of inter-ethnic relationship because we come from nations where we are richly diversified. And I think by this input of migrants or diaspora that come to Australia, that is why I think we are able to achieve that title, the most multicultural country in the world.
Mhm. That statement from my own experiences, I used to work as a airline crew. I've been nearly everywhere, and I lived with the local for 16 years before I got married. I think that's fair statement, it's the most
Yep.
tolerant people, because behind that, this country belong to the Aboriginal, so
Yep.
they had to be tolerant.
Correct.
Mhm. So how much do you think, do you think Australia already, become safe among, geographically Australia belong to Asia, but ethnically, belong to the European, so the feel, according to Australian history, the feel, do you think still feel unsafe among or that already feel, to find the identity?
Um, a very good question. I think um, the government of the day, the Australian government, has declared this land has two most important trading partners, India, Indonesia, and China. I think that itself is a revelation that the country or our country has accepted the fact that we would be partnering with Asian countries, which are now the emerging tigers. And it will be undeniably incorrect if we don't continue to foster the relationship because the economic size of contribution from India, Indonesia, or even China, or from Malaysia or Thailand is enormous for the country's welfare. And I think Australia recognizes that, and the government is pleased that it has a very rich pool of over 250 different nationality, and that itself is able for them to tap into relationship with the motherland of all these different communities.
Mm-hmm. And also, I need to mention, Australia, the first Western country to acknowledge Indonesian sovereignty. That's very interesting.
Yep,
Not
very, very
many,
interesting.
yes, yes.
Very interesting. Yep.
Not many people know that.
Yes, I think, and this is one part of history that sometimes the diaspora, whether I'm from Malaysia or you're from Indonesia, we need to remind our community that has migrated over here. We are in the land where recognition has been given to us by the government. And it's very important that we continue to share and educate to our next generation of children that resides there because this is all the rich heritage they need to remember. And then they can move forward here because they have a sense of pride in who they are and where they come from.
Mhm. Now go back to Bahasa again, to the Malay language, Malaysian language, Indonesian language. I read in an atheist by Indonesian writer Ahdiat Katamiharja, Malay version, published 1960. Not a single, as far as I know, as far as I remember, not a single English word in the book. 1960. So 63 years later, I discovered so many English lexicon in Malay, in Malaysian language. What's happening?
I think during the 60s, the emerging independent countries from Indonesia to Malaysia, they were all going through a period of recollecting themselves as they come up from the post-World War II. They were actually carving up their actual identity and trying to de-Britishalize or de-Hollandize their origin, and nationalism played a very important part where, if it's possible, we put the English language to a side, whereas we highlight our own traditional language. I think that's what you meant, isn't it, Bapak Anton? Yeah. Yeah.
That's one thing that Indonesian language at the moment, I mean, I'm sure that many people, Indonesian people, trying to stop so many foreign words, borrowed word into Indonesian language. That would, people confuse this is Indonesian language or there's so many foreign word, into Indonesian language. And I myself, as an Indonesian teacher, I try to stop not to use so many. If we have already word, 2, 3 synonym in Indonesian language, why we have to borrow foreign words?
Correct. I think this comes back to, I'm sure Indonesia would have a national literature and language board. Just like in Malaysia, we have the Dewan Pustaka and Bahasa. Okay, so the National Academy would be there to ensure that we don't need to apply too much English word into our daily usage of our national language, a bit Indonesian or even Malaysian. And of course, if you want to hear the humorous side of it, then I think the more popular English mixed into a culture would be the Singaporean way, the Singlish. They have evolved into a different twang and different slang, and where the English is typically not the mother English, but it is Singaporean English. That's why they call it the Singlish. Yeah.
Before we stop, Stephen, this is getting interesting. I really want to you to recite in Malay poetry, Indonesian poetry. This is your choice. This is the time I want you to recite, a poetry that you love.
I think, again, Papa Anton, I need to thank you for the privilege. As I said before, you are in the forefront in my encounter, in my community engagement, where you come across to me a person who is very dedicated in preserving poetry as a asset for the next generation, because it's a reflection of our identity, and you have done very well in terms of flying the Indonesian diaspora brand. Now, I have been given a very surprise to read a poem, but I think I'm going for the non-traditional poetry writers. Okay, as you know, we are entering into the new world where a poetry writer can also be an MC, can also be a actor, can also be what they call a podcaster, interviewer, just like you. You have embraced technology, you have embraced the way forward. I think what comes to my mind would be this Malaysian gentleman called Jack Kim Lim. Now, allow me to bring up what I need to read. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I need to look at it. I have two choices which I wanted to read tonight. It has more in relationship to Father's Day. I think every time when we come to this part of September, Father's Day is a reminder to you and to me and to all the rest of it that we are all born with a purpose, and our Father will nurture us into the next generation. So I'm going to read instead this one by Shirley Gyok Lim. My Father's Sadness. So I'm going to pull it out. Hang on. Taking a bit of long time to locate it. Okay. Okay.
For poetry, we will wait.
You can? Yeah, because I need to bring it up and I can't see. Okay, I hope it's here. Thank you for the surprise invite, but I think this is an impromptu one is brings out the actual reaction without being prepared. I think that's wonderful. Okay, there you go. Okay, before I read this, one of the reasons why I decided to go for Shirley's thing, which the other one was by Jack, but I picked Shirley's because the front beat of her poetry, she started off with her father appearing in her dreams. Okay, and all of us, whether we have presently our father living with us or our parents have passed away. For me, I've always had wonderful dreams of my father, where he has left us for nearly 4 years now, but he's always appear in my dreams once in a while, and he's always very assuring. So that's why I picked this one. Okay, now Shirley Gyok Lin Lim. My father's sadness. My father's sadness appears in my dream. His young body is dying of responsibility. Many men and women march out of his mouth. Each time he opens up his heart for fullness, he is shot down by many men and women. Like dragon's teeth rising in the instant of his lifetime. He is an oriental. He claims paternity, but in his dreams, he is a young body with only life before him. My father's sadness masks my face. It is hard to see through his tears. His desires drum in my chest. I feel like a young man with a full moon, and no woman inside. My father broke with each child. Finer and finer, the clay of his body crumbling to a drizzle of silicon in an hourglass. How hard it is to be a father. A bull under the axle, the mangrove netted by lianas, the host perishing of lavishness. That's by her.
Thank you, Stephen. Very touching, words, poetry. Again, Stephen Yin, thank you very much. And I'm sure we will, make another time for episode 2. Thank you very much.
Bapak Anton, thank you again and good night. Selamat malam.
Selamat malam.
Terima kasih.